what happened to one of his fellow members in that church. That person was one of his good friends, and that person was disfellowshipped. And that kind of set my dad into a general distrust of the church assembly as a whole. He never gave up his belief in who Jesus Christ was, but he gave up his belief in the assembly of the brethren because of what had happened, and in his mind was a bit of a overreach of power and abuse of power within the church hierarchy, so to speak. And of course, as Christians, we know that no church is perfect, and that's something that I had to battle with after becoming a Christian myself, but I could understand where my dad was coming from, and I saw that frustration in him as a child, and obviously everyone who was in his family, me, my brothers, I have 2 older brothers, and they're my half-brothers, and my sister, who's my full biological sister, we all stopped going to church. And because of that, I kind of never really knew who Jesus truly was. I had verbalized, like I said, giving my life to Jesus as a kid, but it was kind of more of like it was my parents' God. It wasn't really my God. It wasn't something that I had full knowledge of. And I've talked to Brian about this a bit, and he gave me a little bit of perspective on it, and I think I agree. I wasn't really saved at that point because I didn't really know who Jesus was or what his sacrifice meant for me. And then growing up in the public school system only made it worse, because as I grew up in the public school system, all of these things that they had taught in the public school system raised more doubts in my mind. And so I believed what the public school was saying about how the existence of life came to be and the nature of the universe in general, rather than what the Bible said and what my parents said. I began to internalize that, and then, a lot of things happened that spiraled from that. But like I said, I had 2 half-brothers, and there was never a time that they didn't let me know it. I guess I could say it that way. Because they saw me as the reason why they didn't have a whole family. My dad had divorced their mom and then married my mom and had me, and I was kind of living proof that, for them at least, that I was the reason why their family wasn't whole. And I grew up hearing that I was useless. I grew up hearing that I'll never go anywhere, and I grew up hearing that there's no place for me and no one loves me, from my own brothers. And there was some elements of physical abuse. I remember one time they put me on a trampoline and forced me to, they called it a battle to the death against one of the neighborhood kids. And I ended up getting pretty hurt. And other things like putting kick me signs on my back and, punching me all the time, all, sorts of stuff that you'd normally see in brothers that love each other. It was done out of malice and hatred. It wasn't just your typical roughhouse. It was true abuse. And I began to internalize that. I began to believe what they said, that I was useless and that I had no future and no prospects. And when I graduated high school, I only graduated high school by the skin of my teeth. It was literally only because of my mom having gone down to the high school, to the principal's office, and basically reading him the riot act, telling him, "You're going to make my son graduate. You're going to make him walk down that aisle, or I'll be back in this office and I'll read the riot act to you again." And I spent like 4 days in that principal's office, just from sun up to sundown, doing missing homework and stuff like that. But when I finally graduated, I had no direction. I went into community college just because my parents wanted me to go into community college. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I didn't feel like I had any special skills. I didn't feel like I had any talents or any desire to go into any specific field when I graduated. And I went into community college for about 2 years, just a little bit less than 2 years, because I didn't get my degree. And then I dropped out. And when I dropped out, I went into the workforce. I went and worked at a telecommunications office at a place called C3. And that's where I met this woman who I felt like, truly loved me. It was the first time I felt love from any specific person besides my own parents. I felt like I finally found a reason for living through her. We started living together, and, I thought everything was perfect at that point. But then one morning she woke up and looked me dead in the eyes and told me she didn't love me anymore. And that sent me into a spiral of depression that was so great, I didn't know what to do. I ended up purposefully getting fired from my job. I ended up shutting myself up in my room at my parents' house and looking at online conspiracy theories and all sorts of depressing things that just furthered my depression. I remember having attempted suicide 3 separate times at this point. And every single time I attempted suicide, something weird would happen that would stop me from killing myself. One of those times was when my brother, who I thought hated me, he called me on my phone. I'd never gotten a phone call from him before. Called me up right as I had the blade to my wrists. And so I answered the phone, and he apologized. He apologized for the way he treated me, and he wanted to hang out. And it was really weird things like that should have never had any earthly way of happening. But, we all know that there was an extraordinary way of that happening. We know who was responsible for that. But at the time, I didn't. And so one evening, I was out in the kitchen trying to get something to eat, and then my dad came home and stopped me in the kitchen as I was about to retreat back to my room. And he basically grabbed me by the chin. He's just like, "You need to find out for yourself who God is." And I could see in his eyes how compassionate he was about my situation and how sad he was about my situation. And I didn't want to hear any of that. When he told me, "You need to find out for yourself who God is," I just laughed at his face. I was like, "I don't believe in any God. Are you crazy? You believe in some sort of fake sky fairy sitting on a cloud, judging us from afar? You believe that?" I believe in science. I don't believe in any God out there having some sort of law and judging us based on that law. I don't believe that at all. My dad just kind of stopped me and he said, "You will. You'll find out who God is. You'll find out that God is love." And I just went to my room and I was so frustrated. I wanted to go back out there and argue with him some more. So I did. I went back out there I was ready to argue with him some more. And I found him and my mom knelt in prayer over me. They were asking God to reveal himself to me. And that did not make me feel good. That made me feel even worse. So I stormed back to my room and I looked up at the ceiling and I said, "God, if you're real, show yourself to me right now. I'm sick of it." And of course, he didn't appear in my room. He didn't just poof, he was there. But that night I went to bed angry. And I had a dream, but I would describe it more as a vision. And in that vision, I was walking side by side in a forest with who could only be described as Jesus Christ himself. And he led me up to this fountain and motioned for me to look into this fountain. And when he motioned me to look in there, I bent down and I looked in, and instead of seeing my own reflections, what I saw was all of those conspiracy theories that I had filled my mind with. I saw every single depressing thing that I had incorporated within myself at that point. And I looked up over at Jesus and he said, "Don't be deceived. These things are of the enemy." And that stoked more anger in my heart because I was like, well, where have you been all this time? Who are you to tell me what to do and what not to do? You haven't been there for me. But I didn't say that. That's how I felt. I was just, all this anger was building up inside me. And then the dream progressed and I was outside of that garden and I was face to face with Jesus standing in the midst of this pure white. And behind me was that forest garden. And I knew that I could ask Jesus any one thing. But like I said, that anger was building inside me and I wanted to say so many other things. I wanted to say, where have you been? Why now? How could you do this? How could you let me endure all of this? But instead, what I asked him was, I have heard it said that you are love. Are you love? And instead of answering me with words, he hugged me. And in the moment he hugged me, I could feel the weight of every burden fall off of me. I could feel true love. For the first time ever, I was able to feel true love just radiating out. And I began to cry deeply into his arms. And when I pulled away to thank him, I pulled away from my pillow and my entire pillow was drenched in tears. And in that moment, I fell flat on my face and I began to pray deeply. And I said, I know who you are, God. I know who your son is and I know what he's done for me. I get it now. I know that you're love and I know that your son is love. Lord, please come into my life. Please forgive me for my sins. And I was just crying out in prayer. And I can't even remember fully everything that I prayed about in that moment, but I was just fully submitted to him and his will. And, before I had that dream, before I had confessed that, I had attempted to read the Bible multiple times. My dad would try to sit me down as a kid and have me read the Bible, and none of it would make sense. And I hated every moment of it. It was the most boring, dull thing that I could ever possibly imagine. I hated doing it. But after I prayed that prayer, I had this intense desire to read the Bible for the first time in my life. And when I read that Bible, it actually started to make sense. Every word that I was reading carried a meaning in it that I could feel. And yeah, I didn't understand every single aspect of the Bible the moment I read it, but I was actually able to understand the spirit of what it was saying for the first time. And so I read through the Bible and I came to a conclusion. I had to find a denomination. I knew that I had to find something, a church body to belong to. I had to get baptized. And so I began looking for church denominations that believed in the same things that I read in the scriptures. One of the conspiracy theories that I actually held on to after my conversion experience was what the Catholic Church has done to the world and to its, to the body of Christ. The martyrs that it's created, not just within Christendom, but with pretty much so within every religion ever. And I had an intense hatred for the Catholic Church at large. And as I had read through the Bible, I began to understand that the Catholic Church was predicted within the Bible, and that the Catholic Church was not Christian. Far from it. And so I had that conviction in me. It was something I carried over from my atheist life. And I needed to find a denomination that was speaking against the Catholic Church. And I'd done all this research on the Reformation era. I had done all this research on who Martin Luther was and all of the different forefathers of the Reformation and what it was that they were protesting against, the Protestant Reformation. And every single one of the Protestant denominations I had looked up were not protesting against the Catholic Church anymore. Far from it. A lot of them were wanting to go back to the Catholic Church, is what I saw. They'd bought wholesale into a lot of lies. So I had to find a denomination that spoke out against the Catholic Church. But there was another thing that I saw within the scriptures that I felt was deeply important. Don't ask me why, but I read it and I knew that it was deeply important the moment I read it. And it was about the seventh day. It was about the fourth commandment. So I needed to find a denomination that spoke on and believed in the fourth commandment the way I saw it and the way I read it. And the only denomination that I found ended up being the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I couldn't even find it online when I was looking it up at the time. I had to go to my dad and talk to him about what I was seeing in the Bible and how I wanted to be baptized. And, I needed to find a denomination that clicked with those principles. And my dad's like, yeah, well, we belonged to a denomination just like that when you were a kid. I'm like, yeah, which one was it? Because I didn't know. He's like, it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so I contacted the local Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and I told him my desire to get baptized. I told him my desire to become part of a church body. And he wanted to do a Bible study with me to make sure that I was true and convicted about being baptized. And so we did a Bible study, and he's like, I'm surprised at all of the stuff that you know. He's going over these kind of like tenets and stuff that, do you believe you're saved by grace through faith? Do you believe this? Do you believe that? I'm like, yeah, I believe all of that. And then we would go into the scriptures, and I would point out the scriptures that, I've already read, and he was surprised by the amount of knowledge that I had. And so after I got baptized, he wanted me to go and get into ministry the same way he did. So he took me on a tour of the alma mater he went to, which was Walla Walla University. And I ended up actually attending Walla Walla University not too long after that. My church ended up paying me to go, and I was there for only 2 years. I didn't finish my degree up. God had other plans, but I ended up having depression and anxiety and stuff while I was at Walla Walla University. And I had all of these people who were in my family, my immediate family, getting sick and dying, my grandfather, my grandparents, and I wanted to go home. And so I ended up coming home, and I never went back to university. And I went from job to job to job to job, and then COVID hit, and then I lost my job, and then I cried out to God. I said, I don't want to work for money, just for money's sake anymore. I want to work for you and for your kingdom. And I ended up applying to a job I never thought I would apply to before because it was so below the pay grade I was used to getting. But I applied to it nonetheless, and I got a call back. It was a job at a local ministry, and they interviewed me, and I got hired on right away. And that's where I met Brian. So we're going to talk about that, a little bit about how we met a little later. But that's my testimony.
That's awesome.